Today's game from Paul Morphy is very educational, particularly on the psychological side of the game. His opponent is Alexander Buford Meek, who we have seen before. That name, Alexander Buford Meek, sounds like, he's the chancellor of the University of Alabama. But this game is not in Alabama, as the previous one was. This is being played at the Grand Congress tournament in New York in the year 1857. And in this game, Meek has the white pieces, Morphy has the black pieces, and Meek tries to play against Morphy like he's Morphy, but we see how quickly he loses the thread. Again, Meek has white, Morphy has black. Let us jump right in. E4, Morphy responds with E5, knight F3, knight C6, and D4. The Scotch game is on the board. ED4, and then C3. This could become a Danish gambit or a Gehring gambit. And this is the idea, basically, is to give up a pawn to get a lead in development and open lines of attack against Morphy. Well, we'll see how well that works. DC3, knight C3, bishop to C5, just developing his pieces. Bishop to C4, and D6. So far, so good. White has, fair compensation for a pawn, probably. But here he already begins to lose the thread. He should just maybe castle. Then after, say, bishop to G4 and queen to B3, Meek would attack B7 and F7, and Morphy could take on F3, and then very quickly we get an equal position here, but sharp and unbalanced. But Meek goes ahead and plays H3. When you gambit material to get a lead in development, you have to be very careful about moves like this because you can easily end up not ahead in development, but still down a pawn. So this is a slow move that the position really didn't justify for White. And Morphy immediately plays bishop to E6, challenging the developed bishop on C4, and he's already at least equalized. The best way for White to handle this is probably to take on E6, and after FE6, queen to B3 with a double attack on B7 and E6. And then Morphy could just play queen to C8, and after castling, Black has a slight advantage here. But instead, Meek plays bishop to B5. So he has moved a piece twice in the opening. So he's gambited material, but look at this. After knight G to E7, White gave up the pawn for the attack, but it is Morphy that has the lead in development with the black pieces already on move 8. 4 minor pieces developed versus 3. And Meek, again, he's lost the thread, plays knight to G5, moves a piece twice in the opening. So the lead in development just grows. Morphy doesn't worry about the threats to his bishop here on E6. That's not a big deal. He just keeps developing. So he goes ahead and castles. So the gap in development grows. All the minor pieces developed and castled versus 3 minor pieces developed and not castled. So White plays queen to H5. Well, that is a threat, right? Threatening queen takes H7 checkmate, but that's easily rebuffed. Morphy plays H6, kicking that knight back, which goes back to F3. And now knight to G6. He's wanting to maybe establish some control over this E5 square and use that as a pivot point for his pieces. But White, I can't know what he was thinking, but he might have been frustrated at this point already. Having gambited material, he wanted to justify his attack, and he lashes out with this move, G4. An attacking move when he has less development and a king that basically now has nowhere that it's going to be safe. This move G4 is not justified here. Morphy plays knight C to E5, and then after knight takes knight, he retakes with the pawn. Notice how Morphy is establishing this very strong square on F4. He would love for his knight to pop into that square. But for the moment, White has this bishop controlling that square. So let's see how Morphy handles that. Meek doesn't hold back. He still wants to attack, and he plays G5, trying to open up lines against the king. Morphy plays queen to D4, with the threat of queen takes F2 check, which would cause White's position to completely collapse. So now bishop to E3 to stop that threat. But then Morphy has this idea, queen to B4. He's attacking the pawn at B2, but he's also offering the exchange of these dark squared bishops, which would make this square safe for this knight. So you can see him angling to force white to relinquish control of the f4 square. And basically, white needs to do that. The only other move to protect b2, maybe he could just castle. But in this case, a move like bishop to d4, threatening the knight, which defends this bishop, and white's position would just collapse there. So he does go ahead and take on c5. And Morphy could have retaken that bishop and been in good shape. If after pawn takes, he can just play knight to f4, hitting the queen, queen to g5, again threatening mate on g7, but that's easily dealt with. g6, queen to f6, again threatening mate, but then just knight to h5, queen g5, king h7. And black is completely safe and winning in this position. But Morphy seeks the sharper solution in this case. He plays queen takes b2, an attack on the rook and the knight, although he's lost his bishop, so he does have to recover that piece, and white's bishop is attacking the rook at f8. So, but he's calculated this pretty well, as it turns out. White goes ahead and castles short. Queen takes c3. If he tries to save his own rook with, say, rook f to d8, that would be a mistake. And after white defends the knight up a piece, all of a sudden, white would now be a bit better. So Morphy doesn't allow that. He goes ahead and takes on c3, and the exchange of the rook on f8. But notice something. This bishop is actually far more active than the rook. On a pure point count, yes, the rook is worth more than the bishop, but in terms of its actual role in the position, right now the bishop is worth more. So it's a big deal to lose that dark squared bishop. Morphy just recaptures there. Rook a to c1, hits the queen with an x-ray attack on the pawn at c7, but the queen moves to b2, counterattacking the bishop at b5, and now white doesn't have time to take that pawn. The bishop moves to c4, and knight to f4. Finally, the knight lands on the square that it had been aiming for, and there's no easy way, certainly, for white to eject that knight. The knight is a monster on the f4 square, hitting the queen and hitting the h3 pawn twice along with this bishop. So the queen goes back to d1, knight to h3 check, king to g2, the knight moves back to f4 with check, the king goes to h1, and this next move is a really strong move from Morphy. He knows how to end this game quickly. He plays the move queen to b6. Basically, you've heard of a rook lift. This is like a queen lift. He's moving the queen to this third rank so it can shift over and deliver serious threats to white's king. The best move for white is probably queen to b3 to offer the exchange of queens, but Morphy is clearly better there also. So he goes ahead and takes that pawn. Now Morphy takes on c4, but he's threatening queen takes pawn check, or just the queen moving to the square h6, period. If the pawn were to say take, on g7, then queen to h6 just leads to a forced mate. King can move over, then queen to g5, and queen g2 mate. So in order to deal with that, Meek plays h7 check to give him a delayed move. So now king takes and queen to g4. The idea is he's preventing that very mating pattern that we just saw by putting his queen on the g file. But first, queen to h6 check, just as we saw before. King moves over to g1, and now Morphy gets the exchange back, and now he's up an entire piece, and he still has all of his advantages. Safer king, the material. So obviously the game is over, but the winning process is quite nice to watch. Rook to d8, very simple. Just the old stair step, rook d6, rook g6, pitting the queen and winning it. And there's really nothing white can do. He did play on a4, rook to d6, f3, rook to g6, winning the queen, pinning it to the king. And he did play king f2 in the game score that I have, but obviously resigned after that move. A very smooth win from Morphy, and a lesson for us not to lose the thread. If you're focusing on development, stay disciplined and stay focused. Don't play scared moves, or you might get swamped very quickly. Hope you've enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.